The story I want to tell you tonight begins far away from the deafening metallic clamor of the front line. We are in a place where there are no cannon blasts, no sirens, no terrible screech of tank tracks crushing the asphalt. I want you to shut out all the noise in the world, sit back, and follow me to the western outskirts of Moscow, beneath that gray, leaden sky. Right now, we are at the Troyekurovskoye Cemetery. This is no ordinary graveyard, my friends. This is no ordinary cemetery. This is where Russia's modern history, its broken promises, its unfinished revolutions, and its darkest state secrets are buried. The silence here is not a peaceful silence. It is a silence that has been concreted over, forcibly silenced, suppressed. If you want to map out the real power in Moscow, you don't look at the lavish receptions at the Kremlin. You look at the gravestones here. Even who is buried next to whom is a message here. Old generals, forgotten Politburo members, oligarchs who made their fortunes in the wild, scandalous tenders of the 90s. They all lie side by side under those heavy black granite blocks, in the deep, almost black shadows cast by the huge pine trees. The wind whispers ancient secrets as it passes through the pine needles. On the morning of November 14th, something happened in that cemetery that cut through the familiar, solemn silence like a knife. But it wasn't an explosion, not yet. It was a wave of panic created by a piece of information, a whisper spreading from ear to ear, trembling over the telephone lines. The Russian Federal Security Service, that famous feared three-letter acronym, FSB. That morning, hastily, almost in a panic, at an unusual speed, they made a statement. They said, "We prevented an assassination attempt at the last moment. We averted a catastrophe in the heart of Moscow." Now let's pause for a moment. What comes to mind when we hear the word assassination? What has Hollywood taught us? Snipers waiting on rooftops holding their breath? Rocket attacks on armored convoys? High-speed chases on highways? Those chaotic, noisy, fiery scenes? But no. What really stopped me in my tracks in this story, what really astonished me and even made me shudder as a human being, was the design of this attempt. It was the cold, calculated aesthetic of how this murder was orchestrated. The target was Sergei Shoigu. Yes, that Shoigu we know. The face we've seen for years on the right side of Putin in the news. The once powerful defense minister who fished with Putin in the Siberian taiga on those desolate riverbanks, who lit campfires, who stood right next to the Tsar in those famous vacation photos as his most trusted man. Do you know what the assassins did? I want you to digest this detail. They didn't lay mines on a road he traveled every day. They didn't ambush his armored car and open fire. They didn't send a poisoned package to his office. Those would have been too noisy. They waited for the most vulnerable, most human, most guarded moment a person can have. The only moment when Shoigu took off his statesman armor and mentally left his bodyguards behind. That sacred, intimate moment when he would visit his family's graves, probably his mother's or father's. Please visualize this scene in your mind in full detail, like a movie frame. The air is cold, your breath condensing in the air. There is typical Moscow grayness in the sky. At the head of the grave, there is a single object standing on that cold black marble, nothing else. Just a flower vase. How innocent it looks from the outside, doesn't it? A final gesture of respect left by someone mourning a loved one. Perhaps it contains a few red carnations, perhaps some mournful white roses. They sway gently in the wind. But just beneath that porcelain surface of the vase, hidden by the stems of the flowers, lies a deadly secret. A compressed high-capacity explosive. Experts would probably call it RDX or C4. Small enough to fit in your palm, but powerful enough to blow up a car. And a tiny, almost invisible camera lens watching you. The diabolical plan was this. When Shoigu arrived at the grave, perhaps opening his hands to pray, perhaps just leaning over to touch the cold gravestone and remember the old days. At that most intimate, most vulnerable, most human moment, from miles away, perhaps from inside a warm car, perhaps from a secure room, someone would see his face on the screen in their hand and press a single button. And the secretary of the Russian Security Council would be blown to pieces on top of his ancestors' bones at his family's grave. The FSB immediately came out and said, Ukraine did this. The order came from Kiev. Ukrainian intelligence is behind it. And when I read this statement, I put down the text I was holding. I stopped. And I asked myself that simple, uncomfortable question. Really? Because in this story, in this official narrative, there is something that bothers me, something that doesn't fit. It looks like a piece of a puzzle, but the edges of that piece don't fit this picture. That piece belongs to another picture. What I want to tell you tonight is not just the police story of a failed bomb attack. I wish it were that simple. This is the story of a system beginning to devour itself, like a snake swallowing its own tail. Behind the walls, it's the story of how that vase got there, of where that information came from, the information that Shoigu would be at that grave at that time on that day. Because think about it. Could an enemy know when a person will visit a cemetery? That very special, very unplanned, emotional moment. This is not a military secret. It is not a program published in the state's official gazette. It is a whisper that only the family or those inside the house could know. And if those inside are opening the door, then there's no need to fear the enemy outside, because the danger is no longer at the door. The danger is in the hallway of your bedroom. The danger is now in the eyes of those sitting at the same table with you. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am your name, and our journey of no return into those long, dark corridors of Russia is beginning. Let's dig a little deeper into this vase business. Let's scratch away at the soil they're trying to cover it with. Let's take our time, because the devil and the truth is always in the details. According to the scenario presented to us by the FSB, this operation was organized by some migrants and a few duped Russian citizens acting on orders from Ukrainian intelligence. There's a mysterious, ghostly agent named Ruslan floating around. How does that sound? Like the opening of a classic Cold War novel, right? Or a poorly written spy movie script from the 1980s. But anyone who knows Troyekurovskoye Cemetery a little, who knows Moscow's security protocols, who knows the city's rhythm, approaches this story with a bitter smile. Now, I want you to imagine the entrance to that cemetery. This is not a small-town cemetery where you can stroll in on a Sunday morning and say, let's go lay some flowers. This is an extension of the Russian state. This is a branch of the Kremlin. This is also a meeting point for the living elite. High-resolution facial recognition cameras at every corner. Civilian police officers hidden among the trees, acting like ordinary visitors. Barriers that only allow certain special license plates to enter. You can't just walk into a place like this with a vase loaded with explosives and wires, as if you were going on a picnic. You can't find a specific gravestone among hundreds of graves, mount that vase on it, place a camera inside, adjust its angle, and then leave without anyone seeing you. To do this, luck alone is not enough. To do this, the cameras must, coincidentally, be looking elsewhere at that exact moment. To do this, the metal detectors at the entrance must malfunction at that exact moment. To do this, the guard at the door must look at you, recognize you, and nod his head to signal pass. This is where we need to shift our investigative lens away from the FSB's template, its memorized press statement, and turn it toward the dark and damp reality of Russia's corridors of power. The real question here is not how. Technical details only go so far. The real question is why. Who is Shoigu? I'm talking about the current Shoigu, not the Shoigu of 2022. He is no longer that powerful defense minister. Those heavy epaulets were taken from his shoulders. He was removed from office. He is now Secretary of the Security Council. So, on paper, his title is very impressive. His desk is large, but in reality, he is a lion with its teeth pulled. His influence has been reduced. He is now more of a symbolic, administrative figure. He is no longer someone who can directly change the course of the war, who can tell tanks to stop or attack. Why would Ukrainian intelligence, GUR, or the SBU, who are fighting a life-and-death battle with very limited resources, spend their most valuable resources, their most risky field agents, and their time on an old friend who won't change the outcome of the war one iota? Why would they flog a dead horse? From Kiev's perspective, it might be better for Shoigu to stay alive, because his incompetence, his mistakes, were already working in Ukraine's favor. Killing him would be tactical suicide and strategic waste. So, if Kiev didn't do it, and if it was an operation requiring such inside information, hey, who did it? The picture painted by Western intelligence sources, courageous investigative journalists like Sistema, and independent analysts, which we have pieced together, is much more terrifying. This is not an external attack, my friends. Make a note of that. This is an internal purge. Right now in Russia, there is a brutal, silent, but very bloody civil war going on that we don't see on our television screens or read about in the headlines. It's a showdown between the FSB and the Army, GRU, over who will be blamed for the failures. Remember, you remember Prigozhin, right? the leader of Wagner, when his private plane exploded in the skies over Moscow, in full view of everyone, what message did the Kremlin send to the world? The system discards the parts it now sees as a burden. It discards them by blowing them up if necessary, or by burning them if necessary. Shoigu is now a burden too. The face of the old era, of that failed invasion, of that Kiev in 3 days fantasy. And what would have happened if that bomb had exploded in the cemetery? Think about it. Let's write the scenario. The next morning, the Kremlin would go live on all channels and say, look, Ukraine is a terrorist state, attacking what it couldn't defeat on the battlefield in the cemetery. It is attacking our most sacred thing. It would rally the people around the flag, fueling hatred. But who would be the real winner? The real winners would be the other power centers eyeing Shoigu's leather chair at the table. Those budgets, that power. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Get rid of the internal rival, the old friend, and blame the external enemy. A perfect, flawless murder plan. But that's not the truly frightening part of the story. The issue is not Shoigu's life or death. He is just a pawn. This trap set for Shoigu in the cemetery caused a massive panic button to be pressed behind the Kremlin's thick, high walls. The incident created a shockwave because everyone, from generals to ministers, from bureaucrats to oligarchs, began to ask the same question. If even Shoigu, Putin's closest friend, vacation buddy, confidant Shoigu, couldn't be protected in his most private moment at his family's grave, are we safe? And the even bigger question whispered, is Putin safe? It is precisely at this point that our story transforms from an assassination attempt into a strange disappearance story, a game of hide and seek. So where is Putin? I'll answer, we don't know. Even more interesting, his generals don't know either. And the tragicomic part, he himself probably sometimes gets confused about where he is. I want to tell you a little about architectural paranoia. I didn't invent this term, but when you look at Putin's construction projects in recent years, this term takes on flesh and blood. There are incredible details verified by the investigative journalism project Sistema and Western media, with technical evidence and satellite images. Vladimir Putin has had offices built in 3 different corners of Russia, thousands of kilometers apart. Picture the map. One is in Novo-Ogoryovo, outside Moscow. One is in Sochi, Bocharov-Ruchi, on the Black Sea coast with its warm weather and palm trees. And one is in Valdai, in the deep, snowy, and dark forests of the north. So far, so normal, a head of state can have different summer homes, winter homes, and work offices. But what's strange, what's creepy, is this. These offices are identical to each other. And by identical, I don't just mean decorated in a similar style. I'm talking about a photocopy, a clone. I'm talking about an obsession that the wood tone and varnish of the wall coverings are the same. The arrangement, order, and color of those famous special communication phones, Kremlevka, on the desk, are the same. The pattern of the floorboards is the same. The brand of the door handles, even the weave of the carpet is the same. Imagine this. Think of a carpenter making 3 identical tables with millimeter precision. Why? Why would a person have identical rooms built in 3 different corners of the country? This is not an interior design choice, my friends. This is military camouflage. This is a maskirovka, deception operation. The goal is simple and equally tragic. When Putin appears on television and addresses the public or receives a general, he doesn't want that general, that cameraman, that assassin to know whether he is physically sunbathing in Sochi or buried under snow in his bunker in the Valdai forests. You see him on screen and say, he's at the Kremlin, at work. But he may actually be sitting hundreds of kilometers north of St. Petersburg, in a bunker isolated from the outside world, in the shadow of Pantsir S-1 air defense systems. This detail is crucial to understanding the Shoigu incident. Putin no longer lives like a head of state, but like a fugitive. He has become a man afraid of his own shadow. He fears that his own security circle, his own loyal men, will do to him in his own bedroom what they did to Shoigu with that vase incident. That vase bomb aimed at Shoigu was the missing piece. This piece explains why Putin uses those absurd tables that are miles long, why he even holds video conferences with his closest associates. Because the security circle in Moscow wasn't just breached, it was shattered. The Kremlin's lights are on, yes. From the outside, those towers still look imposing, the red stars still shine. But inside, there is no one. Russia is currently like a ghost ship, run from a video editing room and identical offices. And we are not the only ones who see that this ship has lost its course and is drifting towards the rocks. Those on board the ship, those in the captain's cabin, see it too. Here we need to make a big note of the name Alexander Karachev. Make a note of this name. He is one of the Kremlin's brains, one of its domestic policy strategists. He's not one of those who appear on screen, but one of the shadow figures behind the scenes. One of the architects of the domestic policy bloc. A report of his was leaked recently, and believe me, as a historian, my blood ran cold reading that report. In that report, Karachev speaks plainly, without hiding behind fancy diplomatic words, about the risk of a civil war. He says, Russia has reached a breaking point, similar to the one before the 1917 revolution, or before the chaotic collapse of the 1990s. He says, we have experienced this twice in our history, in the 17th century and in the 20th century. And who can guarantee that it won't happen again? This is not a bureaucrat's warning. This is a regime's own death knell. It is an admission that the regime's nerves are frayed. Do you know what lies at the heart of this sociological warning? It's not just Shoigu, it's the streets, it's real life. The economy is collapsing. The numbers are doctored, but the reality is on the supermarket shelves. The people are restless because of the prices of butter and eggs. People are struggling to fill their stomachs. Inflation is eating away at the money in people's pockets like a rodent. Over 1 million Russian men, fathers, sons, husbands have been lost in the war. They died or were crippled. There is an unfillable, enormous black hole in the labor market. Factories cannot find workers. Do you know what Karachev sees? He sees the bomb placed on Shoigu's grave. He sees the power vacuum created by Putin hiding in his twin offices. He sees the elite sharpening their knives for the post-Putin era, preparing to devour each other. The attack on Shoigu was just the small pointed tip of this great collapse, this massive iceberg, visible above the water. Below, a huge mass of chaos awaits. Now, let's put all these pieces of this complex and dark puzzle on the table. The innocent-looking flower-filled vase loaded with explosives, the identical cloned wooden offices, the leaked reports, those frightening Civil War warnings, and the heavy silence in the cemetery. What picture emerges when we put these together? Strategy experts call this a strategic checkmate in chess, but I want to give it a more human, more tragic, and more literary name: ghost leadership. Imagine a leader, physically alive, breathing, eating, but functionally, spiritually disconnected from the system. Putin, within the beige walls of the twin offices he built, believes he is managing a war with the reports presented to him. Likely filtered and embellished by his fearful generals, everything is going according to plan, they tell him. He wants to believe them. But the real Russia is outside. The real Russia is waiting in the inflation lines at the markets. The real Russia lives in cemetery bombs. The real Russia is dying under the flames of drone attacks. This is a deadlock. This is a deadlock. Imagine for a moment being in his place. If Putin returned to Moscow, mingled with the people, he would face the risk of assassination. The Shoigu incident was a preview of this. They told him, "Don't come, you're not safe here." If he stays in the shelter, hiding behind those screens, his authority will erode. The people will ask, where is our leader? Why isn't he with us? And the dynamics of civil war that Karachev warned about will accelerate. Perhaps this is Ukraine's real grand strategy, not to gain territory on the front lines, but to push Putin further into the bunker with every drone attack on Moscow, to scare him, to isolate him, as he retreats into that bunker, leaving the elites in Moscow to fend for themselves, ensuring that when the cat's away, the mice will play. And watching as the elites, left to their own devices, devour each other, as the system self-destructs, without firing a single bullet, collapsing the enemy from within using their own fear, their own paranoia. This is the pinnacle of the art of war. History is full of stories of kings who abandoned their palaces. Open the books and see. And believe me, none of these stories ended happily. When a leader begins to hide, he actually buries his power in that place of hiding, in that shelter. Tonight, I want to leave you with this heavy, uncomfortable thought. The Kremlin is now empty. No real power walks the corridors of that enormous palace on those red carpets anymore. Only fear, suspicion, and paranoia roam there. Only the echoes of the past remain on the walls. And in politics, as in the physical world, a vacuum cannot be tolerated. Nature abhors a vacuum. That void is always filled in the most savage, most ruthless way. The vase at Shoigu's grave didn't explode, yes. The flowers may have wilted, but the bomb didn't go off. But the crack in Russia's magnificent pyramid of power is now too big to plaster over. The foundation has rotted. The game is over, my friends. We are just waiting for the sound of those massive stones toppling. When that noise breaks out, the world will be a completely different place. So, how do you interpret this silence? Is this the collapse of an empire, or just the system resetting itself? Is this an end or a more terrifying beginning? I'd like to hear your thoughts and continue this philosophical inquiry with you. Let's meet in the comments and discuss until our next deep dive. Until then, don't give up on seeking and questioning the truth.